Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, leading at the intersection of business, innovation, and law. I'm Lucy Saddleton, Managing Editor at the Legal Innovation Forum. Brought to you in association with Co-Flo, this episode features a panel discussion at the Legal Innovation Forum Toronto 2026 on the Legal Department of 2030. This panel explores how AI, data, and automation are reshaping the role of legal departments and allowing in-house counsel to become strategic business partners, leveraging data and innovation to drive better business outcomes.
My name's Nicole Lee. I'm currently in a career transition and exploring new leadership roles. But prior to that, I was in the legal department for the Royal Bank of Canada for 18 years. For the first 16 years, I was a practicing lawyer and I advised their global asset management business. And then for the latter 2 years, I was part of the management committee and I led the operations team for the RBC Law Group. While I started my career in private practice with Macmillan, I essentially grew up in a legal department, so I'm very passionate about how legal departments work, how they work best, or how they should work best. And so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation with this distinguished panel of speakers as we look ahead to the Legal Department of 2030. Before we do that, I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves to the group.
Hi everyone, Rustam Juma, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Volkswagen Group. For those that don't know, Volkswagen Group is the second largest auto manufacturer in the world. We distribute the products of obviously Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini, Bugatti, Ducati, and a whole bunch of other European brands. We're also building a battery plant in St. Thomas, Ontario. We have a small legal department, probably the smallest of the bunch here. There's only 8 of us in the legal department, but it spans legal, regulatory, and government affairs. And obviously it's been busy on the government affairs piece for the last 18 months, and we'll get into that. Canada, believe it or not, is a top 10 market for Volkswagen Group, for both Volkswagen, Audi, and Lamborghini. And so it's a sizable market. It gets a lot of attention. But the group operates in a decentralized manner. So obviously Germany has a lot of coordination, but they really leave it to the markets to operate autonomously. Given the transformation and the friction in the auto industry right now, and the billions being poured into the future and future readiness, I feel like our department's resource constraint. And so I hope to be bringing in terms of the maturity model for legal ops, the infant or newborn stage. I feel like we're crawling, we're definitely not walking yet. And so that's a perspective that I hope to bring. And just a little bit about our group. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but we're litigation heavy. And so lots of customer demands and class actions and all that kind of stuff is what probably keeps us busy 70% of the time. So that's the perspective that I'll be bringing.
Hi everyone, I'm Adriana Molluso. I'm head of legal services at People's Group. The perspective I'll be bringing today is more of the small company focus, although we do have quite a big legal team. I have a team of 15 split between transactional lawyers, litigation, employment, and then also legal operations. I come from a big company, so this is my first foray into a small company. So I've been trying to bring the experiences I got from TELUS, from Tim Hortons, and bringing them to running this team and leading this team in a way that's brings the best of what big companies offer to a team with a smaller budget, more focused vision of that.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Arellano. I have worked in private practice for most of my career. And then in 2017, I joined the Bank of Nova Scotia just to help situate the bank and its legal team. We consider ourselves to be probably the most international of Canada's banks. We have operations in 35 countries. Part of my team, we have lawyers in Singapore, in the UK, in Ireland, US in a couple different cities, in Mexico, Peru, Chile, in addition to Canada, Caribbean throughout the region, etc. So it's kind of a broad, diverse group and lawyers doing different things in certain countries. It's a fair bit of paralegals who are assisting or non-lawyers that have specialties in various areas, Latin American notaries, are important as part of that judicial and legal process. So it's quite a varied group with disparate skills. And one of the things that we've been working on is what we call regionalization. Historically, we've worked as kind of independent legal groups with not a lot of interaction between the businesses in different countries, with legal teams in different countries. I've grown up as a lawyer doing law around the world, and I'm firmly convinced that if you're a good commercial lawyer in Chile, there's no reason why you can't be helping commercial transactions in Mexico. You have the right playbooks, you have the right relationships and connections with other members on the Mexican team to know where Mexican law stops and starts on commercial agreements. So that's one of the things that we've been working on in terms of trying to evolve our legal team. And as my boss likes to tell me, we're focused on effectiveness and efficiency.
Hi everyone, that's very interesting, Ian. I'm really looking forward to hearing that because I think that's quite a unique perspective. My name is Matteo Pagani. I am a second-generation legal technologist for my sins. I grew up in the hallways of private practice firms and then moved into corporate, focused on corporate legal tech. The specific view I bring is around bringing business process specifically and the methodologies of business process into the corporate legal team and connecting the legal team to the broader organization. And I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Great, thank you all. Well, let's get started. We've got a few themes that we're going to explore today. The first one is strategy, everyone's favorite. And in particular, looking at legal's role kind of within the broader enterprise and decision making. So Rusty, I'm going to start with you. You alluded to this. What are the biggest risks that you're navigating at the moment in your current operating moment? And then I might double barrel it to ask how you're strategically placing your team to respond to those emerging risks.
Yeah, so I feel like for a lot of us, the last 18 months have been really tough, especially for sectors that are being impacted by our trade relations with the US. And so, I was joking with the group here that I never thought the day would come where I'm refreshing my Truth Social feed on an hourly basis to see what the policy is or where my day is going to go for that specific day. And so obviously tariffs are a big impact. And so because the government relations team reports into our department, spending a lot of time with government relations and to see how we can navigate USMCA review that's coming up this month. And also pivot in terms of where we're getting our supplies from and our vehicles from. We're getting vehicles from the US, Mexico, and Germany. And so there's a huge different kind of tariff regime there. And especially when Canada implements reciprocal tariffs, it makes things complicated. EV adoption mandates. And so in the industry, the vernacular is kind of the ZEV curves. And so federally, in both Quebec and in BC, there are EV adoption mandates, which really forced full 100% EV adoption by 2035. And I think because the Carney government is focusing more on the economy, for example, climate seems to be taking a little bit of a backstage for the time being. And so there have been pullbacks on those curves. And so it's really about trying to keep up with customer demand and how we can pivot our product portfolio to meet the regulatory requirements as well as customer demands. And these are not small things that they have amps for not meeting the EV mandates, and they're $20,000 a unit. And so it's prohibitively expensive to sell vehicles if you're taking a $20,000 haircut on every car. And then the last kind of piece that's, again, diverging from the US is GHG, so greenhouse gas emissions have been historically tied to the US. And again, because US policy is diverging from Canadian policy, you're potentially going to get different sets of regulations, and they don't make cars for the Canadian market. Like we are, unfortunately, our market is not big enough, and so they make and homologate cars for the North American market. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we can potentially pivot to be able to meet the Canadian requirements if they're diverging from the US. And so, a lot of time is being spent on government relations. I alluded to the fact that we're class action heavy. The number of class actions that we've experienced has increased exponentially in the last 12 to 18 months, predominantly driven by more like heavy consumer protection laws. Everyone's probably heard about right to repair legislation that's being furthered in a number of different provinces. Quebec passed it a couple of years ago. Quebec is actually keeping me gainfully employed, Nicole. Quebec is the province that just keeps on giving. And so, there's London law legislation, there's right to repair legislation. Law 25 in Quebec is obviously keeping a lot of us busy. They have the EV mandates, and then the OQLF, and so the French language requirements in Quebec are also very onerous. I know the US has taken a position that they're considered a non-tariff barrier to trade. And so, it's a lot of friction and a lot of government and regulatory complexity that is really keeping us busy, as well as public sentiment and the way that product portfolios are shifting at the moment.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
So, with your lean and mighty team, how do you direct them? How do you, it's a pretty broad,
yeah.
Evolving mandate.
It is, yeah. And so, I think we're going to get into the skills for 2030, but I think one of the most significant skills for all of us have to be just resiliency and the ability to adapt and be flexible and learn new things. I'm going to get into this later, but I think all of us have to be data engineers. And so I think the law, is gray and we can interpret it the way that we need to, but I think it's really hard. It's going to be really important for all of us to really get into the weeds in terms of data and being proactive in the solutions that we're offering our internal clients. And so just quickly, we have a litigation regulatory lawyer, and I'm really pushing him to be more proactive in the advice that we're giving to prevent lawsuits from occurring in the first place. And so how we can do that, and then we have a product or a privacy lawyer that helps us with Law 25 and a whole bunch of other software-defined vehicle themes that we're seeing now, which is kind of where the future of the cars are moving towards. And so that's the way that we've set it up, and we also have a ton of support from our external legal service providers, and so we thank them for that support as well.
Adriana, maybe similar themes, but from a different industry perspective.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of litigation as well, probably more than we should for a company of our size. But I'll give some background. So People's Group is a bank, a privately owned bank and trust company, so very regulatory heavy. And we deal in the payment space, lending space as well, but in the payments, the prepaid card space, which is subject to a lot of class action. So I hear your comments on Quebec as well. I'm a Montrealer, so it hits home even more. So we do spend a lot of time on litigation. We try to be more thoughtful, and I would say the legal team has been in a position where, because we're seeing all this litigation come and a lot of class action litigation, it makes you question the strategy and the business model and the products you should be in. We've actually gone back to the business and said, is this small business unit viable? Does it still make sense for us? The gut reaction is, oh, of course it does. We have so many clients in this space. But let's look at this more holistically and really understand what the cost is to the organization to defend these class actions. What I often tell the team is, even if we've done everything right, the exposure to these class actions is so costly. So we really have to look at this carefully to see if it's a business we want to continue to be in. And that cost-benefit analysis will start with the strat team and will obviously influence that, the cost of the litigation, the expert witnesses you need. There's a lot that goes into really understanding the true cost of that business. So sometimes the decisions we make and the impact we have in the legal department is going to impact the corporate strategy and the business units we decide to either stay or leave in. I would also say that from a macroeconomic perspective, we're Canada through and through. So we're luckily not impacted in the same way Rusty is with Volkswagen. But there are still changes that happen. There's a mentality, there's a cost consciousness that's a bit more acute than I would have seen in the past couple of years. The second point I will bring is the stage of growth that we are in. So we were in a quick speed growth trajectory. And what that means is the diligence given to agreements was lacking. It was all about, let's expand the business, let's get the revenue. Maybe the lawyers saw the contracts 10 years ago, maybe they didn't. But what that means is today we're cleaning up a lot. So there's a lot of our work that's in the cleanup phase. And the constant struggle or discussions I have with the team is to continue to stay motivated in those times where you are doing cleanup and it doesn't feel like you're driving revenue the way you might have been accustomed to doing in the past, but there is a greater good here in understanding that we're building a more resilient foundation. And you know, a good contract you hope to never look at again, right? And those are the types of agreements we're trying to put in front of clients and get signed today, where it was a very different story 10 years ago.
Great. Ian, I'm sure there's lots going on at Scotia, but any of the biggest risks that are crossing your desk and your team's desk?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I wore this little pin here on purpose because it has the date of the incorporation of Scotiabank, 1832. And it's a reminder in terms of how simple things were likely back then as compared to now. I need another badge about now, but in any event, it's really the pace of change. And it can be geopolitical change, because geopolitical change then influences laws, policies. I think you mentioned the diversion or the distinction between the US and some of their policies and in Canada, and rethinking some of your DEI policies or other policies and how do they apply to the US so you stay compliant, et cetera. A lot of things you had to look at again from kind of first fundamental principles. On top of that, there's an economic change that's going in the world, driven again by technology, cost efficiency. I don't remember if it was Jeff Bezos who said something like, you know, your margin is my lunch. And people have looked at the margins in the financial institutions businesses and they've said, we'd like some of that, please. Or in fact, we'd like some of that, no, please. And there have been barriers to entry because of regulation, et cetera, but through technology, fintechs can kind of nibble at the edges and look at what are the most profitable areas that they can play without the same level of regulatory scrutiny. So you get the issue of, you know, level playing field. And that has caused, you know, organizations like my organization to think about how can we be more efficient, more effective, what can we do better? And sometimes that means cannibalizing your own business in order to be able to be competitive with the businesses that are starting with a clean slate. And you know, banks have a lot of legacy systems, and we kind of have to deal with those and at the same time try to create a layer that we can put modern technology on top and figure out how do we get that tech stack right that allows us to be nimble and more competitive. So the issue of change is kind of the number one, regulatory change as well. And this is where legal, I think, has a unique role. You know, I describe my job as having three components. The first one is business as usual, what I say, keeping the trains running on time. We've got a great team for that. Number two is the emergency room department. You know, stuff happens, and you know, you have to kind of do the triage, stitch the business unit up, send them back out to the battle. And the most important one, which is the one that I think we all have the least time for, is what I call looking for the icebergs. Looking what's coming down the track, how is this impacting change? And there, if you do that well, you really elevate yourself in an organization in terms of the business value that you can have, whether you're thinking about, okay, you see where the trend of privacy law is going, for example, right to be forgotten. And you hear that, you know, our tech group is putting in new systems, and you then ask them, is it being designed in a way that we could be compliant if we get to that stage of right to be forgotten? Imagine if you're a bank and a customer has the right to say, I want all of your information about me taken off your systems. Can you imagine the technical headache that would create? So that's an example of what I call looking out for the icebergs. And I think the legal function, because of regulatory change, looking at policy, et cetera, and some of us have GR components as part of that legal function, I think is really unique and value add to those aspects.
Great. Yeah. I mean, you know, talking about, you know, the pace of change, the risks, whether geopolitical, litigation, or otherwise, and kind of earning that seat at the table because of the pace of change, right? The business is bringing you to the table to help you make those decisions, maybe sooner than they may have in the past. So, sticking with that kind of enterprise mindset, thinking about now, we've talked a little bit about the business, but just aligning ourselves with some of our other functional partners, whether it's finance, compliance, procurement, or other operational teams. Ian, I'll stick with you on this one, just starting from the largest enterprise and the largest number of functional partners that you have to align with in your day-to-day. How are you interacting with the other functional partners in the enterprise? And then how are you directing your legal team to do that, given the backdrop that we've just set with the pace of change?
Yeah, and I think part of it is, again, if you look at the three kind of components, the BAU, et cetera, for me, one of the things that I worry about being in-house, and I go back to Seinfeld, and the fellow who made the soup, and the question really is the soup we make any good? Right? People have to take our soup. They don't have a choice. If they want to hire external counsel, they have to come through us. And so this idea of having a captive client, it was a novel thing for me. But what happens is if you can't make good soup, then people are just bypassing soup for lunch. Mm-hmm. And so this feedback loop with business in terms of are we meeting the needs and getting constant feedback is really important, whether it's through regular formal mechanisms of survey or more informal. And one of the indicators, we've been working as a team to figure out what are good KPIs that a legal team should have. It's a very interesting question, and I don't know that I've got the right answer, but one of the ones that I challenge the team is how often are you being invited into the business meetings that talk about strategy, where the business is going, even if there's not a legal issue on the table, so that you're a valued member of the team. And so that to me is part of what I ask and expect of my team members as part of the BAU. This should be what we do every day. So we're at the table, we can help spot issues, and we're better lawyers if we understand the business. Mm-hmm. And so that's number one. Flipping to number three, which is this kind of looking for the icebergs and preventive so that people don't end up in the emergency room. I don't believe lawyers have swim lanes. And I've never had to say this, and I'm very fortunate I'm in an organization that recognizes that, because my comment to someone is see me now or see me later. And so whether we've got questions on cybersecurity, everyone hears about Mythos, et cetera, lawyers can be a real catalyst for getting people to see the risks and make sure that there are good processes in place. Saying, you know what, it's time that we have a desktop exercise where we assume that there's a privacy issue or this. And lawyers are very good with paper and process and creating playbooks, et cetera. So I think we really are a catalyst, and we work very closely with, we're fortunate in a bank that we've got a group that is just focused on risk, which is very close to legal in terms of a broader remit in terms of, both operational, non-operational risk and financial risk. The other folks that I'm very, very close with, head of compliance and also head of audit. I call them my brothers or sisters, depending on who's holding the chair. We have regular meetings. Have you heard about this? An issue comes up, audit. When's the last time you looked at this issue? They're constantly creating an audit plan. Should this be moved up in your audit plan? And I always think we're very fortunate having kind of many different banks in different countries. I call them living laboratories, because we have an issue in Peru. Then all of a sudden I tell people that there is gold in errors. There is gold in mistakes. You learn more from your mistakes than your successes. And so very early on, you want to create the right culture that you don't want people to cover up mistakes. You don't want people to hide mistakes. So it's a little topical now in terms of sports. When I started, we had the World Cup of operational errors, and people were incented to flag these errors and share them with our team. And, I mixed hockey and football. And so I said, so if we did a sheet that would identify the issue, how it was discovered, what the fix was, and recommendations for other teams as to what to look for. And you would score a goal when you identified these issues and put a sheet. Then if that was identified in Mexico and then Colombia uses it, and finds the same problem, they get a gold, Mexico gets an assist. And at the end of the year, we celebrated the country, it happened to be Chile, that had the most points by wearing team shirts, celebrating with the food from the country, getting everyone online to kind of jointly celebrate that. So those are some of the things that we do, and a lot of the things that we learn or identify are through some of the other functions, whether they're control functions, what we call the line 1Bs, or our risk colleagues, audit, and importantly, compliance.
Yeah, and speaking from the large financial institution perspective, you mentioned the lines of defense. There's the great debate as to where the legal department sits. Is it a line 2? But I really think the legal department, we span all the lines of defense. I mean, we're natural advocates. We can advocate for our compliance partners, for our audit partner. Sometimes we can be good translators too, to help the business understand the position of some of our functional partners. So agree that if we're really talking about kind of succeeding in an enterprise, that is really what our legal departments need to do, and have seen kind of firsthand when we do that, the star rises in the organization when you do that. So definitely, when we get into the skill sets, we'll talk some more about that as well. Rusty, on aligning with your functional partners, right? Might be here, might be elsewhere in the world.
Sure. Yeah. I was just going to add 2 things. I know we've talked about this a lot, and Ian did a great job. But talking about getting invited to meetings, and I think one of the things that I struggled with was that when I started a few years ago, and Sue-Lynn Knoll, who a lot of you know from Purolator, had great advice, and she was like, Rusty, just crash the party. And so if you find out there's a meeting that you think you're interested in, just show up. And I thought it was might be offensive to the business if the general counsel just walks in and takes a seat, but they were happy to have us there, and then eventually you get invited to those meetings. And so I think that was some great advice that she gave me. The other thing that I think that legal can do really well is that I feel like we're plugged into every area of the business, which other organizations are not necessarily as plugged in as we are, and so we can act as a PMO. I mean, we don't have a PMO in our organization, and so I tell my department, follow up, take the project management role if you have to, even though it's not within our scope of responsibility. If we're acting as a connector, I think it's just a good way to understand all the issues. We're the hub and the spoke, and I think there's a great value that we can add and make sure that we're connected to the issues and are providing advice in a timely manner.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like the nervous system of the organization, like the number of times where I've connected different parts of the organization together by virtue of being across so many different issues and so many groups in the organization. Adriana?
Very similar to Ian. In fact, with internal audit, we have legal internal audit quarterly meetings so that I can understand what's on their plate, what are the audits that are coming up, should anything be moved forward, same situation. Compliance now sits, it's been straddling between legal and risk. Today it sits with risk. Between the Chief Compliance Officer, Chief Risk Officer, and I, we're almost joint at the hip, sometimes more than we want to be, but we need to make sure we're very much aligned because we need to speak from a risk perspective with one voice. And any company I've ever worked for, I feel like the one thing every company is still trying to do is break the silos down. And depending on where you are in the organization, I encourage you to look upwards. And if you're seeing that there's no alignment at the top, help make that happen because sometimes the leadership isn't seeing it, right? So I encourage everyone to do that, play that role, play an Italian speaking with their hands all the time, it's so typical. Play that role that you want to play and be that voice that really helps bridge the gaps between the departments. Legal works with all functions all the time. And we have that ability to be able to say, well, this team does it this way, and then we speak to our colleague, well, how is your team solving that problem, right? Sometimes the business units are just so siloed that they're not appreciating and learning from each other's mistakes. So legal has that perspective of being able to work with everybody. So in our team meetings, we really try to focus on things that we should know. Is there something that we should raise to the level? And the lending lawyer might not think that they can learn much from the payments lawyer. They're supporting very different initiatives, but there are learnings in everything, and we try to share those at that level.
Great. Well, switching gears just a little bit, just moving to, I guess, what may have once upon a time been the bread and butter of legal departments' contracts, and the life cycle of a contract. It's Matteo's time to kick off this topic with respect to the contract life cycle management in particular. And we would all benefit from what you're seeing out there, perhaps maybe internal to legal departments, but perhaps other departments getting in on the contract life cycle.
I think it actually just builds on what we've been talking about. So up to this point, we've said, well, we've got our lateral functions, our assurance functions, which are compliance and risk, with legal largely sitting in between it. Then we said, well, legal's got these great touch points throughout the organization all the time. So they're a sensing function of what's going on. So leading indicators of what's happening in the business usually come through legal. All right, and what historically happened was in the contract space, we'd have some upstream work, some deal origination and banking happening, then it gets to legal, nicely structured in legal, but comes in as a mess from the business. They've got to structure it, and then it goes out back to the post-closing team, transaction management team, okay. As legal has matured in the CLM space, and just generally matured as in being given greater mandate in the broader corporate, the ability to change process upstream and downstream has become stronger. Okay, and Rusty speaking about jumping into the business, barging his way in, asking the questions. That is now more attainable than it was in the past. So what does it mean for contract management or contract lifecycle management in general? It means there's more involvement in the connection of the contract to the business process itself. The contract is, in fact, the definition of the business process in which the business has to follow. It's the mandate that says this is what we're going to do. And the differential between what we do and say in the contract and what we can do and say in reality is cost and risk. And so by proactively working with the business along these streams, legal's maturing into the phase that they're having a bigger voice. And we're seeing legal taking a bigger voice in business strategy, not only in the supporting functions. And I'm wondering if you are seeing, it sounds like all three of you are saying the same.
Ian, is there anything in particular with respect to the life cycle of the contract that your team is working on, or how you're thinking about it? There's been a lot of talk about technology and other things, but just the lawyer's role in this life cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll give just two perspectives. Number one of the things that I don't think we do in legal enough, and I'm not sure that it's necessarily legal's role per se, but I think technology will help, is that continuation of what's in the contract so that the business people continue to keep that in their memory. So there's a lot of change in our organizations. People getting promotions, people moving laterally. One of the nice things of being in a big organization is you don't have to leave and get a job somewhere else. You can get something, Monty Python now for something completely different within the same organization. But there is a lot of change and you lose some knowledge. We have a pretty stable legal team, and so we have a lot of knowledge of the contracts, but we're not set up to be the teachers of the business of these contracts. So with tools, that are being referred to, this concept of being able to have this continual education and refresh, I think is very interesting, because as well, you have the plan, the mandate that's in the contract, and then the business goes and does something different.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And constantly when we get into an issue about, disagreement, how have the parties behaved? How have they changed through their conduct, et cetera? And so that update and or that need to refresh, I think, is constant. And how that can be done through a technological solution, I'm not sure that legal is the best group to be able to do it. We could probably help set up those systems and supervise, but one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, because we always get more things to do, is what are the things that we shouldn't be doing? And where can I park them? Can I move them to operations? If we create a playbook, and then with some technology, can I move all the NDAs to a different area of the bank? And of course, with the playbook, they can always call home and ask for help from the legal team, et cetera. So I think this is a need that certainly we could do better in our organization. I'm not sure where the right home is, but I'm very hopeful that through technology, that there is a path for solution. The other point, just to give a different perspective, is more than contract management, take it up a level, vendor management. And so from a bank's perspective, the issue of who we partner with, to use the business term, becomes very important. Reputationally, you do a lot of work, a lot of diligence when you're entering into contracts, but then you need to refresh because things change. They get bought by private equity. So what does their balance sheet look like? Are they good for the obligations they've created in the contracts? Are there reputational issues? Are there resilience issues? What happens if they're subject to a cyber? We have obligations with OSFI to make sure that for our material contracts that we've got backup plans, et cetera, et cetera. So this whole issue of kind of more of the broader ecosystem than just the contracts, I think is something that fits very well in the contract lifecycle, but it's also broader than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we'll switch to another theme, which is the backbone of our departments, which is our teams and our talent. So we'd like to talk about talent and resourcing. So we're going to talk about skills, roles, and also speak to a few flexibility delivery models. There was a panel previously that talked a little bit about alternative legal service providers. But first, let's talk about talent and just in a bit of kind of blue sky, Rusty. What skills does the lawyer in the legal department of 2030, what do they need to have?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a 6-year-old, and I think Nicole and Adriana have 5 or 6-year-olds as well. And so Nicole came up to me last night at the reception and said, "Oh, I heard you have a 5-year-old." I'm like, "Oh my God, he would be so insulted that you called him a 5-year-old." He's 6, Nicole. He's 6'7" actually. And so I think about it a lot. What their career path is going to be. Do I want them to become lawyers? How is the profession going to look like in the future? And I think the most important thing I think that translates probably every industry, and especially our vertical specifically, is just EQ, is having that emotional kind of intelligence to be personable, empathetic, caring, and to have that human touch, which I don't think that AI can necessarily replicate. And so just with that kind of headspace, the way that I approach AI, for example, is I try to do AI first. And so in any task that I'm doing is like, can I use AI for this one thing, or can it help me get going? And I think as a newbie, or I consider myself a Luddite when it comes to technologies, how can I use AI first? And so prompting, being the human in the loop. But more importantly, I think for the future, I think it's really important to continue to have critical thinking skills. You don't want AI to take over, to have that judgment, that commercial acumen that really good lawyers have, comfort with data and technology. And so, really challenge your teams to work with technology, work cross-functionally, as we discussed before, and also be practical. It's not just about being technically right, but it's also about providing practical advice.
Yeah. All good things. In our prep call, Ian, I recall specifically us talking about the curious-minded lawyer. I don't know if you wanted to add to the conversation with that, and anything else that's come to mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think curiosity is key because curiosity signals genuine interest and genuine interest to learn. And I don't think, but for the hours, there's a better profession than the legal profession. We get paid to learn. We're continually paid to learn. And in private practice, you learn from your client that you're working with. You learn best practice. I remember when I was young, I did a lot of technology work for Microsoft. And what Microsoft was really buying on the M&A side were people. And that was, the key thing. They would buy a company not because they wanted to continue what the company was doing, but it had some interesting aspect of technology they had created that they could apply to their product development roadmap. And so how they did their M&A was very focused on people. Then I ended up doing some other type of M&A, and then all of a sudden later on I'm doing M&A in the wealth management space. And what's the key thing when you buy, in the wealth management? It's the people. It's the people who have the relationship with the customer. So all of a sudden now you're applying the principles that you learned in buying for a technology company, and you're applying them now for a financial institution where the people are the key, the magic to doing the M&A. And all of a sudden people think you're a genius, but quite frankly, I got paid to learn by Microsoft the first go round, and now I'm being thought of as a genius because I'm just teaching them what I already learned. So there's not a better profession than law in my perspective, but for the hours. And I'm hoping AI will do something about the hours. And so this desire to learn, this curiosity, I think is really important. And then it creates a challenge for us because then, I'll tell you a funny story. When I joined the bank, before I joined the bank, I knew I had a lot to learn. I had worked with Scotiabank for many years, but it's such a large organization. So at the bank, banks are required to do what we call living wills, which are basically documents we do from a regulatory perspective that said if the bank ever got in trouble, this is what we would do. These are the steps that we would try to make sure that we had liquidity, et cetera. And so you read those documents, big, boring documents, but you understand how the business works, where it gets its funding, et cetera. So I went over to the bank, and it was a secret document. It was kept in the vault, and I had to go and read it in person. And I'll never forget, one day I left 4:30 in the afternoon, and I get on the elevator on the floor of the legal, and there's someone there. They don't know who I am. Everyone in the elevator is looking at their shoes, and one person says, "This was the most boring day. I was poking my eyes out." And the other person who had the best line said, "I think I found the end of the internet." And I thought to myself, and so then I smiled and I look up, and they said, "You look awfully familiar." I said, "Oh yeah, I should introduce it." They said, "You're not the new general counsel, are you?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "How bad was that?" I said, "That was great, actually, because you really helped me think about our talent leaves our buildings every night. How do we have them come back and be energetic and interested and engaged, particularly for people who got into law because they want to learn?" So the whole idea about talent development, I used to think that rotating people destroyed value because you take a person who's an expert in employment law and you move them to litigation. They're kind of related, but they're different. But with the right people, it reinvigorates them. They're learning, they're challenged, and then they create flexibility in a legal team. So this desire for learning, which then hopefully leads to adaptability, curiosity, willing to try things different. One of the informal KPIs that I'm proud of and I keep track of is how many people in the legal team have I exported to the rest of the bank? Because I think we've got great talent and the rest of the bank will benefit by that. And so I think these are the key kind of attributes that you look for. People will get on-the-job training, but it's that ability, obviously with the empathy, the EQ, which is very necessary because it's a people business. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, quite frankly, that difference where the business people, our bosses will go to people more than AI. It's that trust and confidence and that judgment. I think that is the key.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about talent, but just moving a bit to maybe bringing people from outside, talent outside into the group, Adriana, about alternative legal service providers. But then also, you do have a legal operations part of your mandate, and then with Matteo, hopefully we can speak a little bit about bringing those skill sets into the legal department. But I'll start with you, Anne.
Yeah, we have a large team because, of course, of the regulatory aspect, but there are times where we grew too quickly and then we course corrected a bit. And what helped us course correct was bringing in alternative legal service providers. I had a short stint at one of them, so I had a soft spot, and I knew how they could really help a business grow and flex and give you the flexibility you need at certain moments of the business's growth. So currently we have 2 that are on a part-time basis. And the way we really use them, and what we thought was very necessary for us, is to use them to train also our legal team, our FTE team, because they come with, at least the alternative legal service provider we use has very, very senior lawyers. So they've come in and they've been able to train. They're subject matter experts in lending, for example, and we really try to get some of that knowledge in to train our lawyers and to train up, right? I have some great leaders in the team who might not be subject matter experts in certain areas of the business, but they have that ability to be able to learn from them. It's been incredibly useful. It's been a great growth opportunity for the team. And, I originally said, oh, we'll have her on for 3 months, and now we're over a year, budget's permitted, but in 3 days a week, they're just accomplishing what sometimes people couldn't accomplish in 5 at a different level. So from a cost efficiency perspective, it's actually a wash with what the FTE cost versus 3 days a week of this senior lawyer, formerly from McCarthy. I mean, we have some great experiences with it. And it's really just helped us flex when we needed it. If we have a big deal happening, we'll bring somebody on for 3 months, and then we'll scale back. It gives more stability to the team and more learning.
Great, Matteo, you can round us
and I'll be very quick.
Yeah,
so, in the beginning of the sessions today, we spoke a lot about business process. We've gone on the AI journey. We've started to see change. There's adoption. It's individual adoption. It's not enterprise-wide. And so if I could just leave with one skill set that really helps legal ops leads who are now actually growing into broader operational roles, not just legal anymore. It's across the assurance function. It's an understanding of business process management as a science. So being able to map out business processes upstream of your team, downstream of your team, so that you understand the impact of the decisions of the tech you're putting in and how it changes the process and improves it moving forward. So that would be my one skill to pass on.
Thank you, Matteo, and thanks to the panelists on I don't know whether it's a dream state or practical state of what the legal department of 2030 looks like.
Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for the next episode.